What's in store for the Indianapolis Colts in year 2 under Shane Steichen and the return of Anthony Richardson? We're examining the state of the Colts roster today on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast.
You are Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, your daily podcast for NFL and college football scouting. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's better than this? It's guys being dudes here on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. We're the Draft Dudes. I'm Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. He's Kyle Crabbs from Locked On Dolphins. And we are your NFL experts here with you daily to talk team building across the league on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with the Draft Dudes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to issue a big thank you, shout out, and welcome to our everydayers. Those of you who make Locked On NFL Scouting your first listen every day, we appreciate y'all being here very, very much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started.
Joe, happy hump day to you here on Wednesday. And happy halfway point of the AFC South week here on Locked On NFL Scouting.
Yeah, we'll cross over the halfway point, I guess, by the end of today, right?
By midway through segment 2, we will be at halfway.
It's an important thing to distinguish.
About doing 5 shows a week.
Kyle, I need to let you know something.
Okay.
I've acquired a meat smoker.
Have you used it yet?
No, I literally just got it. Somebody in my neighborhood was selling theirs. I've been thinking about it. Had a great deal on it. And now I'm into smoking meats. So no history for me. You know, they'd say when men are approaching 40 years old, you either have to get deep into smoking meats or deep into World War II.
The history books and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so no history for me. We're diving in on the smoking meats. So
I just had to get a new printer. So maybe that's going to be printing off some history books or something. I don't know. I might be treading in the other direction. You know what I do want to do? We have a grill, but we don't have it just sits on the grass in the backyard. I want to get some pavers and have a little area, and maybe I'll build myself a little extra space so that I can get a smoker too.
Man. Smoking. Oh, look, you're gonna build a patio in the backyard, Kyle.
Yeah, it's on my list.
Have you ever done this? It's building a patio is the worst work I've ever done in my whole life.
I did a summer where there was landscaping stuff that did stuff like that, like rock walls and.
Oh, okay. You're a pro basically.
Build ponds, and that was not fun.
Yeah, well,
the ponds was not fun.
Now you get to make that in your backyard.
Can't wait.
All right, Indianapolis Colts. Welcome, the Blue Stampede. Is that what I always do this and I get myself in trouble? I don't know.
You just got yourself in trouble. I'm sure of it.
Well, welcome
to the Indianapolis Colts.
Welcome, fans of the Indianapolis Colts. We're talking about your football team here today, as we are going to do for every team in the NFL across 8 weeks. We're 2.5 weeks into this thing where we assess every player on your roster. We put them in a bucket. The buckets are roster cornerstone, quality starter, rookie, adequate starter, replacement level, quality depth, non-roster caliber, incomplete evaluation, and practice squad developmental player. Every single position is weighted by importance. And at the end of this thing, we are going to really have a great understanding in terms of how these rosters stack entering the 2024 season. We're going to build a ton of content off of this now and into the future. So a foundational part of our yearly calendar here on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. And we're breaking down the Colts for the rest of this show.
A little bit of an unknown, right? What is it going to look like with Anthony Richardson for a full season? Obviously, he showcased a lot of physical ability for that month that he was a player, and they've now had a chance to have him in the building for a year, and I'm sure him being engaged in everything that was happening as that season unfolded, where they're in a division championship race all the way down to week 18. Probably a lot of valuable mental reps for Anthony Richardson, but the book on him was he didn't have a lot of experience coming out of college.
Still don't have it.
He's coming into year 2, and it's you got 4 starts, right? I think that's the big mystery and the intrigue for Indianapolis. Now, I think there's some foundational stuff for them up front that you feel really good about with the offensive line, with what Bernhard Raimann has developed into as a 2-year starter, over 1,700 snaps over the last 2 seasons, and Quenton Nelson and Ryan Kelly as the glue guys, and Braden Smith's been there and is locked in, and they are aggressive in adding more depth between Blake Freeland in the mid rounds last year, and they traded up for Matt Goncalves from Goncalves.
Sure, we're wrong. We're wrong about it for sure. We're going to get arrested
from the University of Pittsburgh. The pronunciation police are also now mad at us.
Yeah.
The point being, and also Tanner Bortolini from Wisconsin is an interior guy too.
I like him a lot.
Draft class. So the depth of the offensive line and the quality of the starters. We have 4 quality starter plus guys on this offensive line. That's
rare.
Very rare.
Yeah.
There's a handful of teams that it was like Philadelphia 2 years ago, and I think Detroit at one point qualified for that. Maybe Tampa Bay when they were coming off of like the first Brady year. There's only been a couple of instances of you look across the board and you feel like you almost have quality starters across the board. And that I think that's where Indy hangs their hat. Obviously, they're paying a running back. They have a quarterback that can contribute to the run game. They got a lot of depth in their tight end room. I think that's the foundational element of what Shane Steichen has and is working with that you feel really good about if you're a Colts fan.
That's a big deal too. I mean, you have a stable offensive line and best running back in the league, and you're trying to acclimate a quarterback that's inexperienced in the totality of his college and pro career. It's nice to be able to say that, yeah, we got an offensive line and a run game that should be able to carry us. And this group, I mean, even when Zach Moss had to play last year, they were able to run the football very effectively. And so I think that is the foundation around Anthony Richardson is really exciting. Now, let's not sleep on Michael Pittman Jr. as a true number 1 receiver. I mean, this guy's been producing, and he's not had any stability at the quarterback position. And so hopefully him and Anthony Richardson can really develop a big-time connection because, you know, you get excited about some stability for Michael Pittman and what type of production that can unlock. Josh Downs showed us a ton as a rookie. Slot player, explosive, can win in a variety of ways, very sure-handed. And then they drafted A.D. Mitchell in the 2nd round, and man, that dude's on a mission. He's unbelievably talented. We've heard about the red flags, and certainly Chris Ballard has a lot to say about those red flags. But obviously, the talent is undeniable there, and so there's a lot to like here. And I think there's a lot to like about Shane Steichen and what he showed you, of course, 2 years ago in Philadelphia and last year with Gardner Minshew, like as a Pro Bowl quarterback with a lot of injuries to this group in totality, right? They didn't have A.D. Mitchell last year, right? The Alec Pierce was kind of relied on, and they're trying to work in Isaiah McKenzie, and they're in, John Taylor's not that whole situation entering the season was really goofy. They lose Jelani Woods like to a hamstring right away, and they still like were right in it, right? They had a chance to win the division in the last game of the season. Like, what more could you ask for? That's a very promising start for Shane Steichen. And, and now it's about building and Anthony Richardson becoming the face of this football team.
Yeah. I mean, they were 4 turnovers against the Browns and giving up 39 points in that game in week 8. They were the 4th down attempt and the attempt to Tyler Goodson that just was a misfire in week 18. There were a lot of bounces of the ball for them that had it work back and kick back the other way. This could have been a team that was playing in the postseason. And so they look at all of the ways in which you're healthier. You've kind of retooled after getting some time on task with Anthony Richardson. I think that's kind of the valuable element of just getting a little bit of playing time with him, is you get a feel for who he is as a player, and then you can cater your supporting cast around him to that. Now, I think the glue guys here are Taylor and Pittman, and for me, they're both cornerstone players. And I think from a workload perspective, if Jonathan Taylor's healthy, you expect to see the player that he was. And Pittman, his targets have gone up every single year he's been in the league. He's been targeting more than he was the year before. And he caught 109 balls and missed a game last year.
Yeah.
It's just crazy volume. It has to be through those two guys, though, because you've talked quite a bit about developing players, developing talent around a developing quarterback. And you don't have that storyline on the offensive line, but A.D. Mitchell's a big investment for them. And Josh Downs is a second-year player, and he had some nice production last year, but not a lot of it was with Anthony Richardson. So for me, the success of this offense and acclimating Anthony Richardson, so much of the weight goes into how much Jonathan Taylor touches the ball and how much Michael Pittman touches the ball.
A top 10 team in total offense last year were the Indianapolis Colts. Exciting to think about what they could be this year with more dynamic talent. And, of course, Anthony Richardson, hopefully healthy for the entire season. All right, we're going to talk more about the Colts, focus in on the defense on the other side of it, so be sure to stick with us. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a huge win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. And look, Colts fans, they got some fun stuff for you to get in on over at FanDuel. They have the over-under for wins for the Colts set at 8.5. So if you think maybe, 9-10 wins are coming, go smash the over. They have the Colts at plus 142 to make the playoffs. Michael Pittman, we talked about his receiving production. They have his over-under for receiving yards in 2024 set at 950.5. How about Anthony Richardson passing yards? They have those set at 3,200.5, so 3,200, the over-under for Anthony Richardson passing yards. So if you want to get in on that action, head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
How's the airport?
Landscapers are here, man. This is a new thing. They're here, dude. They're here for like 30 minutes a week, and somehow
the last 3 weeks it's just been like, we're gonna show up.
Now the good news is they haven't started blowing at the patios right here, right outside this window. So that's when it really gets dicey.
I just saw the mild panic in your eyes as it was happening, and I was like, we got to break the ice here and just lighten the mood a little bit. So, you want to talk anything else Colts offense, or you want to go Colts defense?
I would like to make a comment about just speculating over the offensive line, because you and I did this in the pre-show, and I think it's pretty fascinating with drafting a couple of talented young offensive linemen in Goncalves and Bortolini, and having the stable players that you have in Raimann and Nelson, Kelly, and Braden Smith. There's two things that are interesting to me. One, let's acknowledge it. Blake Freeland as a rookie and having to play for Braden Smith, that was terrible. That was terrible. And so I feel like you've at least improved your quality of swing tackle with Goncalves. But I'd love to see Bortolini or Goncalves get a real shot here to dethrone Will Fries at right guard. I think that's your path for this offensive line to be even better. So that's interesting to me. And then, Jelani Woods, a lot of promise as a rookie, and then, of course, missed all of last year with a hamstring. That's another X factor for this offense that, for as much as you might appreciate a skill set like Mo Alley Cox or Kylan Granson, the real ceiling here to me is Jelani Woods. And so those are two kind of underrated storylines with this Colts offense that I'm paying attention to.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
One more thing. Are we a little concerned about the running back depth after Jonathan Taylor?
Yeah. And I know Evan Hull was everybody's
stashed on your fantasy team, right?
Dynasty darling because he had a good Senior Bowl and can catch the ball, but there's not a lot of proven. I guess maybe the argument there is, behind this offensive line, we brought in Zach Moss, who had no consistent production at all throughout the course of his career, struggled with ball security, right? And he led the team in. Did he end up still holding on to the lead in rushing yards?
I think Taylor might have came back. Did he get it?
No, 794 was the leading figure. Jonathan Taylor at 741.
So Zach Moss led this team in rushing yards last year.
Yeah. And the entire, you boil it down, Zach Moss had 210 touches for 4.7 yards per touch. Jonathan Taylor had 188 touches for 4.8 yards per touch. And they had 7 and 8 touchdowns respectively. So maybe that's part of the argument, the depth behind it, but then that gets into a whole other conversation about the contract for Jonathan Taylor, and that's not really our objective here. And I think Jonathan Taylor is a player that you would be wise to keep on your football team. But
listen, I'm just saying that maybe at some point when that running back run was happening in the 4th round, maybe you get in on that a little bit.
One of those 10 guys that win in like 20 picks.
Just get one of those guys. We feel a little bit differently maybe.
Defensively.
Got to get better here, right?
Just a lot of youth on the perimeter. A lot of youth on the back end. I'm glad they brought back Julian Blackmon. Yeah. That's kind of the Colts' whole deal this offseason, right? Was just we're going to bring everybody back that was under contract for us last year. Like, honestly, their free agent signings were Raekwon Davis and there was like one other player.
Who was it?
Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco.
Oh, Joe Flacco.
Raekwon Davis and Joe Flacco. Like, those are your free agent additions. So you're a really young team. They kind of went through the transition and they changed the coach, and Chris Ballard had the opportunity to kind of do it again. I look at the defense, the youth on the perimeter of the secondary, kind of mirroring what our questions were with Jacksonville. But I think you have a more accomplished player in Tyson Campbell than what any of these guys on the outside have shown. And it's the first place your eyes go when you just sit here and look at the depth chart. You're like, front's got a lot going for it. Who's going to end up claiming these spots outside? Because a lot of guys played, and they kind of all played some meaningful snaps.
Maybe I should give him the same line I gave Jacksonville. Stephon Gilmore and Steven Nelson and Xavier Howard and Adoree Jackson, they're out there. They're looking for an opportunity. And you guys have that opportunity, and you have cap space. So you should sign one of those players and maybe sign 2 of them and let us feel a little bit better about this corner situation. Of course, exempt from that conversation is Kenny Moore. And Kenny Moore had to play a lot. They moved him around quite a bit last year, playing him outside, trying to overcome some of this. And then they didn't feel like they really did much to change that. So, like, Kenny Moore, top-tier caliber slot player, let's keep him there if we can. I do like – there's a lot to like at safety. I think Julian Blackmon is a good young player, and Nick Cross, I think, can be a serviceable starter.
He's coming on a little bit, too.
He's coming on. So what's interesting is I like you mentioned, the front here, goodness gracious, man, I love so much of this. Samson Ebukam just like quietly becoming really, really rock solid. We have him labeled as a quality starter. Both of us do.
Outstanding pass rusher.
Dayo Adanyingbo has really come along, right? I mean, I'm not sure that his pressure to sack rate can continue, but he's been productive now. Tyquan Lewis is a really good rotational player. Kwity Paye, like, you just drafted Laiatu Latu. Like, I mean, holy smokes, have some edge rushers for the rest of us. I mean, there's just a lot here. I'm not sure that they have a guy like an elite player, but the sum of this is really, really good.
What's ironic is you mentioned Dayo and the sack to pressure ratio. I thought Kwity Paye was that way a little bit too, where the sack numbers were good, but I think wasn't he credited with like under 30 pressures last year?
And then what, he turned 35% of them into sacks or something.
Right. But then like getting Latu and adding that into that mix and having Deforest Buckner inside and having Samson Ebukam, who one of the bold takes that we had last summer was like that addition. He's going to lead that team in sacks because they just went after so many of the long-armed, heavy-handed guys, get a little bit of first-step explosiveness. What turns out that happened, and Chris Ballard said, hey, I like that. Why don't we go get another explosive guy on the edge? And they got it in Latu.
Yeah, that's a good take on Kwity Paye. That's a more extreme example of Adanyingbo. Like his pressure to sack rate is more ridiculous.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating. And then you have a guy like the opposite of that in Tyquan Lewis, who gets lots of pressures and maybe not as many sacks.
Tyquan Lewis is a good player.
Yes.
I was kind of hoping as a team that needed some edge depth.
I wanted him to. Yeah, I wanted to.
Sign that guy, right? Like, what can you get him for in a rotational role? Well, he goes back to Indy, and man, the 1 through 5 here on the edge is really good. I mean, if you take their 8 guys and, what's going to become of Adi Adebore from Northwestern last year, who a lot of people really liked as a super toolsy, like dynamic athletic guy. Yeah. I don't know that the light bulb's going to come on for Eric Johnson, who was like a pet project for Ballard from a couple years ago. If Adebore can kind of come in and flip the switch and be the 4th interior guy, this is going to be a really, really deep interior defensive front too, to go with the 5 deep that they have on the edge that is potentially overwhelming for some teams.
I think you're going to see a lot of these edge rushers reduce inside. Deo can do it.
Taekwon can do it.
Yeah, Kwity Paye probably. I think you're going to lean into that because you have Grover Stewart and Raekwon Davis who are run stuffers. I know that Grover Stewart has some juice to him as well, DeForest Buckner, but like I think I bet you see a lot of these guys playing in the B gaps, and they should. They're kind of built that way. So, and this defense has to get better. I mean, this was a unit that was 28th scoring defense in the league last year. Kind of held this team back. They scored enough points. They scored plenty of points. They just didn't stop enough points. And so, to me, as much as Anthony Richardson is the story and this offense coming together, this defense has to take a step. We'll see if they have the guys at corner, and obviously this front needs to show up in a big way. All right, we are going to bring this conversation to a close here on the other side of it. So be sure to stick with us.
I felt like you were messing with me. You started the transition and felt like you stopped and you looked at me and I looked at you and then you kept
trying to time it up, man. They're blowing off the patio right now. You know what I mean? So I was trying to give myself another second there.
If it makes you feeling better, I didn't hear any of that.
Oh, wow. No,
I only heard the mower or the airplanes.
Yeah.
Was you guys were getting ready to take off.
With 25 minutes from the closest airport. So,
How did we not talk about the linebackers for the Colts yet?
Well, we got to save something for this segment.
So I really like both of these guys.
You should.
I really like Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed. And like Ronnie Harrison's become like the latest version of this big safety to transition to linebacker. And what the Raiders felt like they hoarded like 6 of those guys for there for a minute.
Yeah.
Like this is a pretty nice success story as a guy who can have some coverage upside in sub packages in Ronnie Harrison. But both EJ Speed and Zaire Franklin, like they run really well. They're pretty solid tacklers. Franklin's kind of development in taking over the primary linebacker spot as they phased out Shaq Leonard. It's a really nice 1-2 punch, and playing behind this defensive front, I like it a lot. And then, by the way, you have Julian Blackmon, who almost game by game, like every possession was opposite Kenny Moore. So you've got Blackmon who can run the alley and tackle on one side at safety, and then you've got Kenny Moore in the nickel on the other side. I just think there's a lot of like the core of this defense. You got a lot of speed and good tackling behind a really talented and deep front. So it should be better than what it was last year.
When we came out of the Colts conversation last year, studying the tape, I remember we were like, man, Bobby Okereke's good, and Zaire Franklin's good, and EJ Speed's good, and like they
didn't miss Okereke,
right? And I mean, like really, like not to like throw salt on the wound, but like Shaquille Leonard, this group has been kind of flipped upside down, but it's probably, I mean, like you feel really good about this pair of Franklin and Speed, especially like you mentioned behind an outstanding front that should probably be a little more firm. With Raekwon Davis, it certainly has some run stopping ability, so those guys should be able to run. They gave Raekwon a good amount of money too.
Yeah, he got 3 for 21, I believe, off the top of my head.
Healthy, yeah.
It's not a small investment, and especially for how Indy was in free agency.
Yeah, this
is
like
you guys really liked it because you like paid him.
Yep, big ticket.
I'm glad you mentioned the defense there at the end too, just from the sense that when this team went 5-1 to get to 8-6, they had multiple turnovers in 5 of the 6 games. And the only game that they lost was when they had 1 turnover, and that was against the Bengals. The last 3 games of the season, Atlanta, Raiders, Texans, and you snuck out the win against the Raiders. But you go 1-2 in that stretch to miss the playoffs. The defense did not force a turnover in any of the last 3 games. And I think that's where, when you kind of review where this team goes from here, they were middle of the pack in turnovers forced, but they felt like they came in bunches they had at least 1 turnover in each of the first 14 games of the season. And then it goes cold late. Is Latu going to come in and be the stone cold killer? Is like, you know what I mean? Like, that's my question, is like, who's going to be the go-to big play, big moment guy. Because they had over 50 sacks last year too. They had 51 sacks. A lot of guys that contributed 8, 9 sacks apiece. So a lot of guys that could do it. Who's going to be the guy? Can Juju Brents make that leap and be a ball hawking corner for them? No, that's the question for me for Indianapolis is who becomes the big play catalyst in the gotta have it moments, because I think that's something for them that is an open void on their defensive depth chart.
Yeah, I'm sure. I don't think that answer is very clear. I recognize the need for an answer. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing it's going to be a collaborative approach here where like they're going to have to rely on the depth of their front to be able to, as a group, make those plays. And you feel like the pressure in quarterback disruption is going to be there. I wonder on the back end of things, who's going to be able to clamp routes, who's going to be able to make plays on the ball with consistency. Because like if you get into the pass rush versus coverage debate, I feel like you have the pass rush piece of this. You should. Yeah. Now who's gonna step up on the back end, in terms of the coverage piece of it, in my opinion. I think that's where I'm more concerned about where the answers might be. So hopefully they go sign a couple of these corners to help round out this roster, because I really do worry about it being a fatal flaw for this team. Corner's an important position, and we don't have any answers here.
Another thing that the Colts kind of subplot storyline for them this season, they got to solve their issue with the Jaguars. Jacksonville's 11-6 in the last 17 games against the Colts in head-to-head competition. They swept them last year, and they put 30-plus points on in both games.
If they split with Jacksonville last year, they win the division.
Correct. So that for them is kind of it's not relevant to the roster per se, but just kind of putting the bow on the conversation with the Colts.
Yeah.
They were close last year, and defense kind of let them down at the very end of the season. They kind of had their own misfire offensively within that game. Let's not overlook, like, if Minshew hits Tyler Goodson on fourth down, like, does that game end with a Colts win? And would that, what would that look like? Head-to-head against Jacksonville has not been friendly recently. And, Indy still leads that series all time. The Jaguars only have 11 or 19 wins in the series all time. And they're 11-6 in their last 17 games against the Colts. So a lot of success for Jacksonville lately. So a couple different storylines for them to have to resolve if they're going to take the next leap that they're capable of.
Not to mention Houston's here, and I think a lot of people are expecting them to win this division.
And Tennessee, one of the top 3 spenders in free agency this past season, their past off season. So we'll get into them tomorrow.
Should be competitive, a really competitive division. Like you look at it and you feel like Houston. Houston feels like the team that's going to win it, but I think this is going to be tight. This was as tight of a race as you could have last year to the very end. And I think all 3 of those top teams have improved. And even Tennessee has improved. We'll see what happens with Will Levis. I think the quarterback piece of this division is going to be the real deal. How much better does Stroud and Lawrence get? Does Richardson enter the arena as a difference maker? And then, can Will Levis function in that offense? We'll find out.
If Richardson enters that arena, then I think the Colts feel really good about where they're positioned.
As long as teams just don't pass the ball over them all the time.
Right. Well, we'll get some more perspective on this division tomorrow with Tennessee, and then Friday we're going to put all the position groups into tiers and tier maker all the position groups for all the teams in the AFC South. So that's the rest of the week here on Locked On NFL Scouting. I'm Kyle Crabbs. He's Joe Marino. We hope you guys enjoyed this conversation on the Indianapolis Colts, but that is going to do it for us here today. We are out of here.